Oh, hello. Just reading my new Mawtribes book. It's trash. No, I'm kidding. Let's talk about it. I mean, I'm kinda kidding. So I did a review on Doom and Darkness's channel right as things were getting spoiled, but this is a deep dive. More than just first impressions, I waited the requisite amount of time for the FAQ to come out, to do some math, get some games in, and go to a 5-round tournament. Even if it was partners with 1k Beast Claw, 1k Beast of Chaos for Beast Chaos Raiders. It was hard fought, and we got 4 wins, 1 tie, so don't underestimate 2 C-tier armies when their powers combine to form Captain Planet. Although to be fair, our 2 armies are just better at 1k than 2k, and the custom table rules were completely wacky and game-breaking. But powerful if you could exploit them, and we did. I'll tell you about it later. For the different sections in this book, we'll do a then and now for some context on the changes, and I hope a thoughtful analysis of the units, abilities, and options, with some ideas for list building and tactics, as well as how things sit in the metagame at large, for the army as a whole, as well as its different strategies. First and foremost, let's take a look at your bedrock foundation for Mawtribe army, the Ogre Glutton. Most of the very powerful armies in the game get there by having great battle line that can absorb buffs and synergies, and is well supported by competitive tools. 120 points for 3, and a great massive regiment discount that gives you 12 for 400. 48 wounds is about average for big blobs of battle line, and they have a bad save, so they're a little fragile in the grand scheme of things. Heavily resistant to normal Chaffbuster spells that deal 1 mortal wound per model on a dice roll, though dunked on by hammers with rend like Icebrow Hunters, Monsters, or Morsar Guard. They have 3 attacks per model with exploding 6s, plus a bite attack. Exploding hits are extra powerful here because of your 2 damage weapons, although they don't have rend, so high armor will be a problem. All in all, as far as battle line go, this has potential as a good starting point for a strong faction. If you want glass cannons, look no further than Iron Guts. While they seem heavily armored, they are in fact fragile for their points, but you have got to respect the damage. The amount that these 2-inch reach 3 damage big boys can dish out is stellar, even considering the competitive AOS metagame as it stands. With no buffs, 8 of them on the charge will kill Nagash, and they have a lot of buffs to absorb. Their abilities are all like hyper terrible though. I mean, it's whatever because they're still worth it for their damage, but yeah. These are IDK sharks that got blessed with good combat profiles. For monsters, the Frostlord on Stonehorn is a fine pick, but he needs an artifact to work, so he may be difficult to fit into lists. When he's fully equipped, however, he's quite the powerhouse, either as Anvil with Ethereal or Hammer with Brand of Svard. Without flying or force multiplication, he won't be your Megaboss on Maw Crusher, and he won't be your Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, but he will be an Abrams tank shot out of a torpedo tube. Slaughtermasters are your buff slot machines, 1 in 3 chance to pull out +1 to hit from their cauldron, plus a lore spell for another good buff. They do have 2 big downsides because they don't do very good melee damage, and almost everything else does in ogres. And Rock Chomper is like an impressively garbage spell. It only works on gluttons, it procs a mortal wound on a 6-to wound, and even then, it's only a 6-to wound on their Gulping Bite, which they only have 1 attack of per model. It's like barely better than Arcane Bolt. The new Tyrant has a great updated command ability that does a D3 mortal wounds to a friendly unit, but they do not have to take battle shocks for the rest of the game, whether he's alive or dead, and this is very strong. He's like reasonably okay in combat as well, and you get to choose a big name, which Fateseeker for a 3-up save seems like the obvious choice, but I actually think there's a pretty good argument for Brawler Guts. Adding 1 to wound rolls when he charges means he's wounding on 2s with all 3 of his weapons, and part of his problem in my opinion is that he's not quite doing as much damage as you would want for 160, and so for me I would probably take Brawler Guts most of the time. Oh yeah, I should say that Butcher is a fine alternative to Slaughtermaster. While you really want that +1 to hit buff, it is only a 1 in 3 chance, and his melee profile is terrible, and his War Scroll spell is grade F trash. You can give up some of the casino magic, and take a Butcher instead, and in exchange you'll get a highly decent combat profile actually, as well as a War Scroll spell that can do a lot of mortal wounds if you get lucky, so actually never mind about that casino thing, you're just kind of trading 1 casino for another. So there's a bunch of other War Scrolls in this book, and many of them don't quite hit the mark. I'll talk about them later when we get to their synergies. But as far as a foundational set of War Scrolls for an army, Mawtribes is looking pretty good at this point. Where else to begin but battle traits? This, or a similar rule, was what all the Beastclaw players wanted. We dubbed it Large and in Charge, which I still think is a better name. But the rules text is more streamlined and elegant than our more granular system of wounds remaining, so hats off. Being straight 10 for monsters and straight 2 for ogres is just a faster and cleaner way to play. A downside is elite units like Mournfang are still abysmal at capturing, but it also means that gluttons aren't worth a preposterous number of models, although our system was only designed for Beastclaw in mind, so I think we get a pass. Note that when we came up with this rule, we didn't know Beastclaw wasn't going to remain a real army, and so we didn't consider its effect on Gutbuster models. Only some Gutbuster players wanted this, and notably against it was Doom and Darkness, who had a convincing take from the Gutbuster side. Being at a huge disadvantage for capturing was simply Gutbuster's excuse for being overpowered for their points in the new book, and would give them license to push the envelope on how strong their war scrolls could be. Fair point, and he got me on board, but sadly GW didn't agree. As it stands, Might Makes Right lifts ogres up from disadvantage to normal on objectives for their points, and there was no pushing of any envelopes on war scrolls. So while Might Makes Right is technically a powerful battle trait, it takes something weak and makes it average. That honestly most armies inherently just have already by the nature of how most units exist at all, especially Battalion. Pay 120, get 10 Bestigors, pay 280, get 40 Plague Monks, pay 360, get 60 Stabbas, etc. While there are some exceptions like Stormcast, that stems more from how poorly designed their book is. Liberator rules are pathetic for 40mm base Battalion. Tangent aside, am I saying Might Makes Right is good but doesn't count since it just band-aids the faction up to normal? Yes. Then there's Trampling Charge. This one's good. While kind of nothing below 8, sorry Mornfang, it means that all your ogre units of 8 or more get about a d6 mortal wounds on the charge, which is sweet. This is sort of Gutbuster's answer to the activation wars in a way. It also heavily incentivizes you to leave the MSU to non-ogre keywords, and go big or go home on units of Gluttons and Iron Guts. Stonehorn already did this before, so this affecting your monsters is really no change. I suppose this gives Thundertusks the option to charge for some extra damage, but I have no idea why I would want to charge my ranged artillery into melee combat. For their points, they aggressively suck at fighting, they're fragile, and it limits their future targets, not to mention charts their already heavily nerfed Frostwreath Ice. So it's really nothing here. Trampling Charge is a big improvement to Gutbusters, but for Beastclaw it gave them what they already had. Then there's Grasp of the Everwinter, which is what Beastclaw's old battle trait, the Everwinter table, has now become. The concept of the Everwinter had such a high potential for inventive rules, but in the old book it was just a random table that gave you one of 3 random buffs, army-wide. Mystic Shield, 3-inch Hero Phase Move, or the universally hated and unlikely Raging Blizzard / Deadly Frostbite, which had you roll a dice for each enemy unit still in combat with your guys when it rolled back around to your Hero Phase, and deal d3 or d6 mortal wounds to them. Deciding that inventive, Everwinter-inspired mechanics would still be too much work even the second time around, they dropped the other stuff and made Grasp do the thing that nobody liked, although more often. While still basically nothing on turns 1 and 2, it's just too unlikely, it has a coin flip chance of working later game, but no chance of d6 mortal wounds. I was really looking forward to Everwinter-themed Endless Prayers or progressive battlefield effects like IDK's Tides of Death, but this is a Gutbusters book through and through, so there was just no room for cool Beastclaw-only abilities. On a more positive note, let's talk Ravenous Brutes, which, like Might Makes Right, is mostly well thought out and well written. An ogre exists in one of 2 states. It is either ravenous with hunger, or stuffing its mouth with food. If an ogre unit is more than 3 inches from any enemy units, it is hungry. If it's within 3 inches of any enemy units, it is eating. Add 2 to the move characteristic of a unit that is hungry, add 2 to the bravery characteristic of a unit that is eating. This is great rules writing. It's distinct, it makes sense, it ties in with the flavor, and the +2 move is exactly what Gutbusters needed. The missed opportunity here is the +2 bravery half, which I find very underwhelming. It's relatively minor as far as buffs go, especially considering you can be Battle Shock immune for a command point, or a Tyrant can hit them with his CA turn 1, with immunity for the whole game. Mawtribes kind of steps on its own toes here, to be honest, and not for the last time. Why don't eating ogres heal? This seemed like the obvious place to put such a mechanic, and a race of flesh devourers and blood cooks would surely have a healing theme a la Flesh Eater Courts or vampires, but they just kind of don't. Disappointing. Still, Gutbusters will greatly enjoy being 8-inch move. As for Beastclaw, your Stonehorns lost Run and Charge, which you on demand turned into move 18 with a command point, so you lost 6 inches and gained 2 inches. For Mornfang, you gained 3, but lost your 3d6 drop the lowest to charge. Again, for the Beastclaw half of these battle traits, you essentially got what you already had, but in this case you're just worse off. Overall, Mawtribes battle traits are okay. I've seen many say that they aren't overpowered, and that's a good thing, listing off a few go-to overpowered examples, but then I really started thinking about it. Obviously these are no Endless Legions or Locus of Diversion, Relentless Discipline or Slanesh Summoning, Blood Tithe or Contagion Points, Feeding Frenzy or Smashing and Bashing, DOK Blood Rites or IDK Tides of Death, Urgold Runes or City's Endless Spells Empowerment, Seraphon Summoning, Half Army Deep Strikes or Once a Turn Teleports, or, well, Really, there's such a massive list of battle traits people consider OP that it nearly fully encompasses every faction in Age of Sigmar. Mawtribes mostly just brings Gutbuster War Scrolls up to par for the modern game, with +2 move capturing and impact hits, but does nothing at all exceptional in a game where almost every army has something exceptional to do, and often many things. Age of Sigmar armies are like Soul Calibur 2 characters. They're all cheap or OP in different ways, and that's the fun of it. In a way, that's the balance of it. Like, okay, maybe Nightmare is too good, but a dedicated Valdo can mess him up, and even a low tier like Astaroth becomes a monster in ring out stages. Mawtribes is Ryu who finds himself in a tag team anime fighter. It's like these are the battle traits that Gutbusters needed in a 1st edition GHB, except it's late 2nd edition and it's a full battle tome, if that makes sense. For the Beast Claw half, your monsters now equivalently capture for the points you're spending on them, and then some cups and balls got moved around which either gave you what you already had, or less than what you already had. Honestly, what the fuck? Rounding out faction abilities, let's talk Terrain Piece, the Great Maw Pot. This is definitely a more Gutbuster than BCR themed Terrain Piece. Many Alpha Stones don't even have Butchers or Maw Pots in them at all. And it's a weird fit for a BCR force since they don't have any wizards. But I get it, it's a combined book and, you know, somebody's got to come out on top. Like, +1 to cast on nearby wizards is pretty much what you always want in an army with wizards, right? But it is a pretty short range, and your wizards are going to want to be wholly within your Glutton Clouds and Iron Guts and stuff, and so they have to stick pretty close by them. In most games, this is probably going to be +1 to cast for the first turn, and then you guys kind of gotta go elsewhere. For Throw 'em in, man, I was really hoping for a better mechanic to refill this. I really wanted to have this be repeatable with something I could build around or play towards, instead of just like being 100% in my opponent's control, and even a nearby enemy unit can take casualties off outside of 6, so even if like you get them around this thing half the time it won't refill. This was a great opportunity for Mawtribes to do more mechanically than just walk forward, and they blew it. Speaking of, let's walk forward to the Spells, Prayers, and Tribes section. Gutbusters seem solid, but are looking for competitive tools, and Beastclaw have a lot of catching up to do to make up for starting out in a worse spot and getting mostly passed up on battle traits, which is a shame, but we knew this would happen if instead of BCR2 we just got lazily tossed into a Gutbusters book. Butcher Spell Lores. Well, these are all harder to cast than I might like, 7s across the board. I suppose there was room for another Nurgle-style army that had important spells that it struggles to resolve. On the upside, their effects are just good. +1 attacks is great, -1 to hit is great, -1 armor saves is great, +1 mount damage is alright. Overall, I'm quite pleased with the spell effects here, with the notable exception of Fleshcrave Curse, which is a tragic missed opportunity. Why can't I target friendly units with this spell? It even has built-in synergy with Mawpot healing for a second Blood Feast at a painful cost. This book taunts me with failed opportunities to do anything interesting with the mechanics. Firebelly lores are actually pretty good, but an 8 for Billowing Ash totally kills it. I mean, why print this? Tongues of Flame would be really cool on a hero, causing the opponent to have to make a choice between keeping them alive or risking movement, but instead you just can't target them. It seems ultra safe to the point that it almost ruins it. So far, I'm just seeing a lot of clues that this book was written terrified of having ogres be too good, and it seems to be overcompensating. Are they aware of where both of these armies sat before this book? Are they aware of where most armies sit now? Are they aware of what the best armies can do? Like, I'm honestly not sure about any of that. Everwinter Prayers are next, and we only have 3, but that's fine. To be perfectly honest, most armies only have 2 or 3 good prayers anyway. My evaluation of these prayers is under the pretense that the only priest in the army is 340 points, with a bad melee profile and a bad ranged profile, so I expected these prayers to be powerhouses. They kinda have to be to make them worth it. Hailstorm has a 33% chance at dealing D3 mortal wounds at 18 inches. Gale has a 50-50 for 3-inch move, and Call of the Blizzard has a 50-50 of returning 1 Yeti model to a unit, which is such a joke. These prayers are trash. Embarrassing, actually, and yes, I'm aware that if you keep buying hugely overpriced Huskards, they give each other +1 to the rolls, but that's the fastest sunk cost fallacy in the world, starting with the first one. If Huskard on Thundertusk was in Skaven, he'd cost 240 points and still never be played. Why is this guy 340? Like, what are you seeing that I'm not? For lores, Gutbuster got some good damage buffs, but tricky to cast, and didn't find any of the competitive tools they were looking for, like teleports or big bonus movement or 5-up shrugs or flying. Beastclaw got hot garbage. For traits and artifacts, I can safely skip most of them because really, they're all so shitty or needlessly specific that it would just add a half an hour to this already long video of me complaining. The too long didn't read for traits is Tyrant. You don't want him to be your general, and none of these traits make that prospect remotely tempting. Crushing Bulk is fun for Timmies, though. Butcher. Questionable hygiene is good. Gastromancer is okay. And Spell Eater could have been cool if we got an endless spell to combo with, but we didn't, so it's not. And the two that have to do with Ravenous Brutes are depressing. Eating and Hungry were brilliantly set up as keywords to get referenced in later rules, and they just failed hard on their own layup. Effects that trigger off of Eating and Hungry are so painfully minor in this book. Like, just imagine if every war scroll in this book did something if the unit was hungry and did something if the unit was eating. Like, how cool would that be? Never mind. For Frostlords and Huskguards, Frostfell Aura is deceptively powerful, but so rarely matters that ultimately it's not worth taking over a tribe. Nomadic Raider's pretty good because it works on their mount, and you can very easily get in your opponent's territory with these guys. Touched by the Everwinter would be good if your prayers were good, but they are not, so it is not. Voice of the Avalanche would be good if they bothered to give Frostlords good command abilities this time, but they copy and pasted the old ones, which were already worse than the default ones, and then they nerfed their range. Thanks. Nothing else here is tempting over a tribe. For hunter traits, Winter Ranger is good for command point farming and making a unit of cats into a source of real damage one time. It's a good but expensive trick. Some of them would have been excellent on a monster hero like Eye of the Blizzard, but we are trolled by imprisoning them on this awful man. And for Firebellies, they have no traits. For artifacts, Tyrant gets 5 big duds, and 1 gruesome trophy rack, which will be your basis for underbelly armies, and not the worst choice for artifact, even in melee ones that don't have a monster. Although Sky Titan scatter pistols are hilarious, and so I guess I take it back. Butchers, and this might be controversial, in my opinion, have nothing worth playing. Dracoline Heart fills the pot at the start of your hero phase, while you use the pot during, so you can never double up on one turn, which would have been good for monsters. Stay terrible, Mawpot. The Apron lets you cast 2 spells, but doesn't let you learn another, and combining it with Gastromancer nets you a real poor man's Blood Gullet for the same cost, artifact and trait, so there's no reason to ever do this. Dank Spores are very situational. You have to be within 6 of an enemy when it rolls back around to the start of your hero phase, and so are not very tempting to me, even though the effect is powerful. For Frostlords and Huskguards, I was honestly blindsided by this one. BCR artifacts were bad before, and we long wondered what we would get when the new book came out. I was actually surprised that we still have literally 0 playable artifacts, even as the second choice to a realm or tribe one. As far as Alvagear rune tokens, I've seen a lot of people miss this, so once per battle at the start of your hero phase, you can use this artifact. If they do until your next hero phase, you can reroll hit, wound, and save rolls. But you think it works on the mount inherently because Nomadic Raider works on the mount, and Brandos Fard works on the mount. But those only work on the mount because they exactly say they do, and this one doesn't. So you're only rerolling the punches and kicks or the Frost Spear, as far as attacks are concerned, and as such, it's just not worth it at all. Like, once a game rerolling saves is good and everything, man, not including those mount attacks with the reroll hit and wounds just kind of kills it for me. Also, somehow Blade of the Allfrost got worse, and not just a little worse, it got way worse. For Hunter, the healing pelt we used to take on our behemoths, even though it wasn't very good, is now Hunter only, which is just a low blow at this point. Also, Katanak Browplate would be a legitimately good artifact and a real choice between that or Ethereal, but it too is stuck on the Hunter only. What the fuck? Firebelly has no artifacts. Mawtribes traits and artifacts are kind of a shit show. 4-ish okay choices and 40 plus options. So much wasted ink. These needed a hard second and third pass, or a better starting point or something. These aren't just a bunch of fluffy abilities that aren't competitive. These are like horribly bad and boring at the same time. They're just a total waste. Mount traits. Stonehorn have 2 options here, although 4 other hyper bad ones were printed for some reason. Black Clatterhorn gives you +1 to hit on rock hard horns, which start at 4s, and so this is a way of fixing up their war scroll a little. For one hero only instead of actually fixing up their war scroll a little. Or Metal Cruncher to have a strong beginning of combat bite, but at the cost of not being able to use it against a lot of units you really want to use it against. Consider for a moment many of the most durable units in the game: Dryads, Hearthguard Berserkers, Witch Elves, Plague Bears, huge clouds of chaff like skeletons, Stabbas with netters, etc. A lot of them technically start at 5 or worse armor. Both traits are good and a real choice which one to pick. Unlike Fyreslayers and Flesh Eater Courts and Stormcast, however, you can't take the same trait twice like they can. So you won't be playing with more than 1 or 2 Stonehorn heroes, even in a full BCR army. RIP. Thundertusk mount traits are comically bad. Remember when we were talking about trampling charge and I wondered who would want to charge with their artillery that sucks in combat? Well, they really want you to make this bad play, as most of these want you to charge into or be in combat, which is stupid. Not a single one helps a Thundertusk get any of their actual jobs on the table. The only one that does anything is Alvigir Ancient, which gives you access to Always Strikes Last, but it's really fiddly. It's only if you don't charge, so you can never bring it to the enemy, only 3-inch range, so it's easy to charge near and then pile around to avoid. And best played as a very expensive ball of Huskard and Iron Guts that dare your opponent not to charge it. And to be honest, they probably just won't. If Huskard was priced reasonably, this might be an Iron Guts delivery system in a mostly BCR army, but I'd shelve this idea until Winter Points changes to see if most of the Beast Claw stuff gets pulled down to reality. It's a bunch of 100-point overcosted turtles at the moment, which is what they were before because for our new book, the BCR War Scrolls were kind of carelessly copied over. BCR players were really looking forward to powerful mount traits with interesting effects like trample over models as if you had flying to not get so easily locked in tar pits, or retreat and charge to reactivate their charge bonuses, or real stone skeleton, or Thundertusk traits that did anything at all for how they are played on the table in the game. We also secretly hoped we could get traits on Beast Riders, but no such luck all around. Clatterhorn and Metal Cruncher are good, but very safe. There's no gruesome bite for 18 mortal wounds on a Ghoul King here. Alvigir Ancient feels like it should be on a Stonehorn, and honestly most of the other Thundertusk traits feel like they should be on Stonehorns as well, because they're all about charging and being in combat. Why would you separate the tables if you're not going to help each one for the job they're supposed to do? These are mostly baffling and a huge missed opportunity, again. So after artifacts, traits, prayers, and spells, Gutbusters find themselves with some pretty sick damage buffs, albeit tricky to cast. Although none of them are in the same ballpark as like the truly amazing buffs, like Witch Elves +1 rend and +1 damage, or Skaven reroll all hits and all wounds, or Flesh Eater Court's D3 extra attacks, all of which are easier to cast. But still, you should be happy. And Beastclaw got mostly nothing, actual nothing, mostly nothing, 2 good mount traits on Stonehorn, and mostly nothing. Really feeling like we're in someone else's book over here. Onto the tribes, which I suppose has become the make-or-break moment after so many missed opportunities. We start with Meatfist Mawtribe, a sub-faction that just does nothing. I have no idea how this made it to print. The ability trait and artifact are comically bad, and the command ability is one of the most specific I've ever seen, only buffing gluttons and only buffing their worst attack, while wholly within and only once per turn. There isn't a reason for anyone to ever take this tribe, and in the lore it's supposed to be the biggest and most powerful one. Braggoth lost to this? Even if you wanted to take a glutton-centric tribe, Bloodgullet's command ability on your gluttons is significantly better, and then it has other stuff too. It's not just that it's bad, there's nothing fun in here either. It's just a complete waste. Bloodgullet is the best tribe at making you do what you already do, but more of it. Although that isn't necessarily what you were looking for at this point competitively. Your butcher keywords become double casters, and you get a great glutton buff to add to the pile. A trait that helps your big units at 12 pile in, and Splatter Cleaver, which isn't particularly great, but it's good enough to be won over with fun and flavor, and it's better than the Mawpot single-handedly. While this tribe doesn't solve any of your problems or give you any new competitive tools, it is certainly the most fun tribe, and the one I feel will be the most popular moving forward. In that respect, Bloodgullet is a huge success. It's got fun rules that give your casino carnivore casters extra pulls on the slot machine of buffs, and a splashy artifact. A lot of this book seems like it's trying to make fun stuff, but screws up and makes horrendously shitty stuff instead, which ends up not being fun no matter the intentions. This one really hits the mark. Underbellies is the only tribe that even attempts to give you solutions to your problems, and for that I commend it. While not even 18-inch range can save the awful lead belchers whose updated war scroll saw fit to keep their shooting profile unplayably bad, and still requires them to stand still for D6 weak inaccurate shots. As for command abilities, Thunderous Salvo brings your Iron Blasters up from trash to okay by literally doubling their damage. That's what it took. You still can't hold a candle to armies that have real shooting, as even 30 unbuffed Iron Drakes dunk on your ranged output. However, with 3 or 4 Iron Blasters shooting twice a turn, you can actually affect the table in a meaningful way. Competitive Mawtribes players will probably grudgingly gravitate away from Bloodgullet and into Underbellies with a Trophy Rack Tyrant. I expect lead belcher numbers to rapidly decline as people play with and are disappointed by them on the table. A shame that they gave the wrong profile +1 to hit and kept the damage of a fucking cannon at 1. This one would have been a slam dunk if more care was taken to update War Scrolls, but Beastclaw weren't the only ones with lazy updates in that area. Alright, on to the one we've all been waiting for, or at least I have, Boulderhead, the spiritual successor to Svard Alfrestun, formerly a battalion where you ran too many Stonehorns. I know what you're thinking, that's not possible, I agree, but it was too many for a 2K game. Fearsome Breed adds 1 wound to your monsters, which is okay, and lets you take a mount trait on every hero instead of just 1+1 per battalion. Which, the longer you think about it, doesn't really do anything, since you want an artifact on every Frostlord anyway, and you run out of good mount traits after 2. So you won't be taking a 3rd. And Thundertusks were bad before, and considerably worse now, for the same price, so you don't want any of them. But awkward list building aside, +1 wound, I'll take it. Dig Deep Your Heels feels underwhelming, but is good, especially in the movement phase to get to later objectives. Lord of Beasts is crap, but you can't win them all. The crown jewel though, and honestly the main reason you'd take this tribe at the end of the day, is for Brand of Svard, which, besides being the only good artifact for a BCR monster in the entire book, when coupled with the Black Clatterhorn mount trait, allows you to build the legendary Murderhorn, a being that will regularly do 30 damage on the charge against 4-up armor if you're reeling ones to hit with a command point. Unfortunately, there aren't really any competitive War Scrolls in the entire rest of the Beastclaw lineup after Frostlord on Stonehorn, because they mostly just copy-paste their old race to the bottom ones, but who cares, fill the list up with Stonehorn Beast Riders, and pray that the winter points reductions are reasonable enough to fit another one in. Next up is the Thunderbelly tribe, spiritual successor to Olweir Alfrestun Battalion, and boy are the ancestors shamed by this one. If you thought Meat Fist was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. When we first saw Swift Outflank, we thought that it was a clear indication of Mournfang ambushes, but no, it's just an ability that is so poorly thought out as to be useless. The movement you lose getting to a board edge, or by deploying near one, is already more than the single run roll will give you. Outflanking strategies was for move 18 Stonehorns. Mournfang just don't cut it. Why this isn't just run and charge always is beyond me. Rip and Tear is a tragic command ability. Remember IDK's Sharks that everyone mocked how shitty that ability was because it did nothing against 1-wound models and full health multi-wound models even if there were casualties, so it also didn't make any sense immersion-wise? Well, Mournfang have a decent command buff trapped behind the same stupidity. Stormchaser is super weak, and Shatterstone is a joke. Deadly Terrain is not deadly, and this is a complete waste of an artifact. This tribe is a complete failure, and it's sad to see the great-looking Mournfang, which come in the Start Collecting box, remain shit. While the War Scroll hasn't really been improved, a Mournfang tribe could have saved them. Maybe Trampling Charge considers them a monster if they're a unit of 4 or more. Run and Charge like old Eurobad did, and doesn't now. A 3-up save to fill the much-needed Cavalry Anvil slot in this faction. Board Edge Ambush, Double Pile-In, anything. Nope. Winterbite is the tricky tribe, and I think it has potential for those willing to spend $600 US on some of the worst Finecast sculpts currently for sale. Or 22 Fenrisian Wolves and 24 Kitbashed Yetis. These sadists will enjoy -1 to get hit by missile weapons while wholly within their territory, and +1 to wound for Yetis and Frost Sabers wholly within 12 of their general, as well as always strikes first on said units within the same range for a command point. Is always strikes first OP on these guys? No, they really don't do enough damage even with these buffs to be very threatening, but it is definitely something and makes up for their atrocious 6-up saves. The artifact is a dud, as a 5-up is simply too unreliable, but it had the right idea, and could have been a fun but suboptimal choice a la Splatter Cleaver if it worked on, say, a 3-up. This is the perfect tribe for hunters raised by Yeti's trait to give Yetis +1 attack, which would really fix their damage up a little, except you can't take a trait with a tribe, so get fucked, I guess. What you can do is save up some command points and then drop a hunter with a 12-man unit of cast to stack his +1 attack CA onto them a few times and then make a 6-inch charge for some decent one-shot damage. It's not particularly cheap, and it's not crazy damage since Saber's attacks start out so bad, but it's not a bad trick, and it will cause your opponent to deploy suboptimally. Once down, they're pretty dead, obviously, even with always strikes first, but if the opponent has no shooting or spells, they could still annoy them for a turn or two. However, you're kind of out of command points after the first drop. So for tribes, Gutbusters have Blood Gullets for fun, and Underbellies for lukewarm range that requires a specific second artifact, but at least gives you something to do besides walk forward. Meat Fist is just like the first idea they had for a tribe and never gave it a second look, and it needed a second and third look. Was this book rushed or something? For BCR you have Boulderhead, which despite some awkwardness is solid enough. The thing that really holds this one back besides baffling mount traits on Thundertusks is the awful job on Thundertusk War Scrolls they did. Thundertusks used to sit in a strange place. Not fun for casuals, but not good competitively. And so, what was really in order was a War Scroll reimagining. Instead they just made them so bad that not even a casual would complain about them, or use them. I didn't play Thundertusk spam, but a big percentage of BCR players did, and now they have 2,000 points of trash, which is a pretty shitty thing to do to people. Imagine a new battle tome coming out and your weak-ass unit is still in the race to the bottom. Eventually Huskguard might be cheap enough to be worth running, because prayers, but Frostsword on Thundertusk simply can't be saved by points. They didn't even give him a command ability. On the other side of things, you can meme with 6 Stonehorns now, and I plan to, but something like this isn't quite competitive, with Beast Riders being as expensive as they are. They just get outclassed by Gluttons for their points, who, while pretty good, aren't exactly Witch Elves over here. Winterbite I think has potential, but it's a shame it's filled with exclusively the models you really don't want to be playing with or buying. And Thunderbelly is just a disaster from start to finish. For once, you wish they really did just copy the source, because Olweir was better. Going tribeless is a real option since none of these are particularly competitive, but honestly neither are any of your tribeless options either. For battalions, let's start with the Gutbuster ones. After all, it's their book. Tyrant's Gutguard is what you'll be taking generally to get the extra artifact in Underbellies so that you can put a trophy rack on him. It's a shame the ability is kinda bad. To be honest, your Iron Guts are generally more important than your Tyrant, and so if it had the opposite effect where you could move wounds from them onto him, it would be better. But it's still worth taking if you have to, and I think you have to if you're in Underguts. Gourmand is the blood gullet of battalions. It requires everything you wanted to be playing anyway, except 80 points of pure tax lead belchers, and the ability is well received, yes. I did want 2 grabs at that +1 hit buff. This one's the fun option. Butcher's Band has just about the same requirements as a Gourmand, except with a worse hero and a worse ability. Well-fed Warriors is better healing than the Mawpot, though. I'm personally kind of sad to see a Grot-centric battalion, because one of the main reasons I chose not to play Gutbusters when I was starting the game and instead went with Beastclaw was because I didn't want to have to play with a giant cloud of snot creatures. But now they're in the same book, and they're our best chaff option, so fuck me, I guess. This battalion's actually kind of good, too. People who like Grots will be pleased. I mean, you gotta give different types of people what they want, right? Still waiting on those competitive people. For Gutbusters, your battalions are okay, but none of them really turn things around, and they all have flaws. On the Beastclaw side of things, you'll notice that the fan-favorite Braggist Beasthammer is just gone, and before you ask, no, you can't still play it for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that there is no longer any such unit called Gorgruntas. They're Auric Gorgruntas now. While I wasn't a fan of allying in a bunch of orcs into my ogre army to be more powerful, it was a very popular battalion, and so I'm sad to see it go for other players' sakes. I suppose they needed room for the 2 full pages of obnoxiously unplayable mega battalions that no one will ever use. Why do they keep making these? For battalions, we start out with the Yorlbad, and you'll immediately notice that unlike the Gutbusters battalions, these ones are not filled with the stuff that you wanted to be playing anyway. It's really a shame that you can't play a Frostsword in here, and have to take the more fragile Huskguard. That being said, Stonehorn Beast Riders are going to be your battle line of choice, even if they're a little pricey, and Mornfang packs can do good damage if the stars align and everything goes right. Yorlbad is your option if you want to be able to Alpha Strike. If you do, you're probably going to want to play a bunch of minimum units of Mornfang packs to sort of keep the peace around your home objectives, and then max out on Stonehorn Beast Riders to just have 4 monsters run across the table after making them go first, and try to get that double. Then there's the Eurobad. 6 is proc a Mortal Wound, and that's good. It used to be on the wound roll, so great, like a legitimate buff. Is this enough to save Mornfang? No. But hey, if you want to play with Mornfang, this is the best place to do it. Obviously, you still don't go Thunderbellies since it's useless, but, you know, you gotta take what you can get, I guess, with this book. Eurobad used to add +1 damage to the Huskguard's attacks, including his mount, and the battalion just lost this effect, but the procs being twice as likely is probably a fair trade. A pity about those taxes and messed up war scrolls, though. Then there's the Torbad, which used to be a joke, because it required 3 of the worst types of Thundertusks, and the ability was bad. This has been updated to still require 3 of the worst types of Thundertusks, and the ability is still bad. And the Thundertusks are much worse than they used to be, and they didn't used to be very good. Maybe with enough racing to the bottom on points reductions, this could be playable someday. Finally, there's the Skull, a tool we grudgingly use to get an extra artifact and deep strike 3 units of Frost Sabers, with generous ranges between them, as speed bumps and screens. Now, hunters can naturally bring 1 unit with them, but only with half the range, and the battalion ability does nothing. While you can get a second unit of cats in there with your hunter from a trait, you won't ever be taking that trait because Winter Ranger exists, as do tribes. We still probably have to take this battalion in many lists, it just feels worse to do it because it's worse now. For Beastclaw, our battalions are kind of sad. Eurobad has a cool effect, but the stuff in it is not great, and the other ones just got worse. I feel like I've said this a lot in this book. So we've reached the end of all the options for Mawtribes, and Gutbusters have some sick damage with buffs, but are missing any access to critical competitive tools like flying, teleports, deep strikes or ambushes, activation wars, out-of-sequence fighting, out-of-sequence moving, double pylons, summoning, troop regen, a way to invalidate chaff, great ranged, high durability, a way to deliver that damage where it needs to go fast, strong offensive spell game, endless spells or prayers, impactful terrain, anti-magic, game-changing battle traits, and they suffer against high armor, big monsters, chaff, and first and last strikers, all of which are very common in the meta at the moment. As for the units I haven't really talked about yet, or details I should bring up that I skipped over, here are some quick notes. While Gorges and Hunters can deep strike, they're more like bad, expensive Kinnerai Heartrenders than Isheron Soulscryers and Runesmiths that get to bring your power players along for the ride. That being said, for 120 points with some tweaks to his War Scroll, Icebrow Hunter is no longer the terrible gingerbread man of last year. You're still like not thrilled about taking him, but with all his little options and all the things he can do, he's kind of like an ogre version of Antarctic Solid Snake. For your ranged, on Lead Belchers, it seems at first like they were trash, and their range damage obviously is, but on the reveal show I was cautious to call them on it, because maybe I was looking at it the wrong way. They had this decent melee damage component, so maybe the shooting could be considered utility. After trying some out in Underguts though, for me they ended up just sucking at both jobs. Their melee damage is okay, but Glutton's exploding hits and especially the free rerolling charges is just so much better, and your general durability is already kind of a problem with Gluttons, and Lead Belchers are worse. At 480 points for on average 5 shooting damage once per battle round, it's just so fucking bad. If it were enough to clear chaff, that would be one thing, but it's really not. I'll take rerolling charges, 8 extra wounds, and considerably more damage at Gluttons twice per battle round any day of the week. Like, they do have Rend, which is important against armor, but 1 less attack per model and no exploding 6s honestly still has Gluttons pull far ahead even with great armor, and only in cases of like exceptional stuff like 2 upper rolling 1s do Lead Belchers have a chance. I feel like Lead Belchers are either going to die out or remain contentious forever. Honestly, your mileage may vary. With Iron Blasters, obviously they're trash outside of Underguts, but within, their shooting can be good. It's just very swingy and unreliable. Missing half your shots and having a big spread of 1 to 6 damage even after failed saves is annoying. It kinda needs a Trophy Rack Tyrant, and it needs a Battalion, and you don't want to play either because Tyrant is expensive and kind of unimpressive when compared to Butchers, and Gut Guard sucks. Also, even though you're getting +1 to hit monsters, Iron Blasters are barely tickling the common competitive monsters people are playing in 2nd edition. In a test game, I shot my opponent's Velocita twice with all 4, rolled average for everything, and he healed up to full on his turn from the D6 Chalice. Like I did less than a D6 damage to it. I'm paying $640 for this? Well, it could just be a target priority problem. Obviously you don't shoot stuff like that. A big competitive problem with all the Underguts lists I've seen is that they're essentially lukewarm shooting armies that have a million drops. And shooting armies really don't like to be outdropped unless they have proper anvil screens, which Mawtribes definitely does not have. A list like this will end up probably not having enough points for Iron Blaster chaff and the number of combat units you want, but it might be the most competitive idea, I'm not sure. On Maneaters, these guys give you access to run and charge, which is a useful trick, but they're just so expensive points-wise, like 180 for 3 is nuts. But they could have a job, so I could see playing these in MSU if their points got heavily reduced. On Nob Lars, and I think I've been calling them grots this whole video, I'm not sure. Anyway, on Nob Lars, so you might look at these models and say that they look horrible, and you might look at the War Scroll and say that it looks like it's high on the list for the worst War Scroll in the entire game, and you might be right on both counts. But then you might say, I didn't pick up a big boy elite army to tediously maneuver 60 tiny models around the table. Well, whoa there, Pardna. I'm sorry for your loss, because these are cheap chaff which you still need, and can be battle shock immune thanks to the Tyrant. I think at a certain point Mawtribes players are just going to have to become emotionally okay with playing a bunch of Nob Lars even though they hate to. I know I do. That being said, even though it is really cheap for a whole bunch of bodies, like, they're so shitty that they actually don't do anything at all. And for me, I just want more out of my clouds of chaff for that. Like, I want Stabas and Nettas and stuff that can debuff people or actually do damage. As a bunch of completely worthless wounds, even if they're battle shock immune, it's just kind of like a ticking time bomb. And moving forward, I'm probably not going to be trying to play them very hard, and not only because I hate them, but that is a big reason. Icefall Yetis. So these guys have obviously a really bad save, and the -1 to hit isn't going to reasonably fix it. I've played with these for years. And they don't do very good damage due to force to hit, and their 1-inch reach is so tiny with 50mm bases, which really limits heavily the number you can get in any particular fight. But their activate from and pile in 6 is quite strong. There aren't any run restrictions with piling in, so you can always run with Yetis. In fact, when it's your turn, you can always retreat and run, and pile in with Yetis. This gives them, when you stop about 4 inches away, kind of always strikes first, in a way. So in some giant combats, over the course of a few turns, you can be like, running up and piling in and attacking, and then next turn retreating and running and like swiveling around and piling back in. So like over the course of a few turns, you're fighting every time, but you're still kind of maneuvering where you eventually want to go. And not to mention the fact that even though you tell your opponent it has pile in and activate 6, oftentimes they'll forget, and so a lot of times you can kind of RKO out of nowhere into combats people weren't expecting. And they're possibly still one of your best units to protect the backfield or go be annoying all over the place. But now that Gluttons and stuff are no longer allies and Yetis don't have the Ogre keyword, so no might makes right and no hungry move bonus, I think they do fall a little bit by the wayside. If that proves to be the case, I say good riddance. The sculpt is shit and always has been, and there are no good third-party alternatives. And mine look like trash, so I'm pleased to put them in it. Scrap Launcher. This thing's not really going to do any damage to heroes or monsters, but honestly neither are Iron Blasters. And it's better than Iron Blasters at clearing chaff. And it's got a decent battalion that makes it better at clearing chaff. I think this thing's like playable, which is incredibly depressing because it looks stupid, and the cool one is worse. Mournfang, Prey Hackers, and Iron Fists always. You want those 3 attacks. These guys are really held back by their gigantic bases. They're obnoxious and expensive to run 8 of, and Might Makes Right doesn't really have them in mind. As I said earlier, when they're not charging, their damage pretty much sucks, but they're like reasonably comparable to Iron Guts damage if they're on the charge and get all their different buffs and everything. Although that's only compared to Iron Guts who don't have any buffs. So do you want 3-inch faster movement or great damage all the time? Also, in units larger than 4, your bases are so huge that you're probably just not going to get the rest of them in there. And so they compare unfavorably to literally everything else in larger unit sizes. On Gluttons, I know I've talked a lot about them before, but double weapons always, and don't forget they reroll charges. Huskguard on Thundertusk. Your expected melee damage with this 300-point monster is the same as a single Iron Gut model. So okay, it sucks in combat, its Frost Beam sucks now, and your prayer lores are lame, but D3 healing or +1 to wound War Scroll prayers are alright, and Alphagear Ancient could be a thing, just not for anywhere near 340 points. The other Thundertusks are even more hopeless than this guy because they don't even have prayers to try and convince yourself they're worth it, but again, we'll see about Winter Points changes. I mean, it would be a miracle. They usually work in 20s, but if this guy came down 100, he'd be playable, maybe. And they probably don't want you to spam these guys like people used to, but if they didn't want you to spam them, then how about you make the War Scroll actually good so they're like worth 360 points, but who am I? Oh, I should talk about Iron Guts abilities a little bit. While their damage is indeed sick, and 2-inch reach on their weapons really activates the almonds, their War Scroll abilities are trash. A 6-up is simply too uncommon to really consider when people are throwing spells at you, and the extra model's fleeing is very rarely impactful. Important battle shock tests are rarely ever taken in this game, due to so many immunities and command abilities and all the rest. And against 1-wound model units, like a D3 is a drop in the bucket, I don't know. Down to the Iron Guts requires an Ogre to have fled the battle, which is like what you're actively always trying not to have happen. You know, your Tyrant is making people immune for the whole game, the eating mechanic is working against that happening, and you're spending command points to stop that from happening. Like, why can't this just be a once-a-game use ability, you know? It would be in some other army, that's for sure. That's actually a big theme running through this book. Normal stuff that you would expect to just kind of work or naturally be there are like bad or missing in this book. And then you have to buy all these options or pay opportunity costs to try to get them up to average. Like 12-inch range on Lead Belchers that goes up to 18 from Iron Guts, which is honestly still a little low, and their damage still sucks. Or Iron Blaster damage being almost worth their points, but only when they're shooting twice for a command point in a tribe. Or your only good Beast Claw artifact being Day 1 DLC that you need to buy the Boulderhead expansion for. Like, there just aren't any Beast Claw artifacts worth taking at all in this whole book, except for the Boulderhead one. There's also lots of taking something away in order to give you something, which feels like how you might handle some S-tier Broken Factions new book in an effort to tone them down a little, without it seeming like a big nerf, except Ogres started out trash. There's also a great deal of needlessly specific or conditional abilities that in any other army would just work. Like +1 attacks that you might find on a Vampire Lord who can affect anything, but in our book it's only for Gluttons, and only their worst attack, and only once per turn. Or run and charge, but only for Mournfang, and only if they're wholly within a board edge. Or rerolling Tyrant attacks, but only melee weapons, and only if he targets a hero, and only if that hero also has an artifact of power. Or re-rolling wound rolls, but only for Mournfang, and only if the target already has wounds allocated to it, and casualties don't count. Or you can re-roll ones to hit wound and save, but only after one of your own guys has fled to Battle Shock, and only once per game. Or attacks that proc 1 mortal wound and 1 healing, but it's only on a 6, and it's only 2 wound, and it's only on gluttons, and it's only on their single bite attack per model. It makes a huge percentage of these rules frustrating and unplayable. It's like you look at a ranged unit, like here are handgunners, or here are Iron Drakes. Hey, these guys have pretty good shooting. Let's buff them. Now it's very good shooting. And it's like lead belchers. Okay, they have half the range they should, and do like a quarter of the damage you want them to. Well, you can take this tribe to make their range okay and their damage still terrible. It's like, okay, I guess I just won't. I don't know. Like, casually though, Gutbusters will be loads of fun. Go Blood Gullet with 2 wizards, load up on 24 gluttons with double weapons, 2 mobs of 8 iron guts, skip playing any chaff, and step right up to the random buff casino and swing for the fences. On the Beastclaw side of things, for casual play, literally just buy 3 start collecting boxes and make a Boulderhead Urlbad with a Frostlord for exactly 2,000 points. Mournfang in units of 4-4-2-2, Brand of Spard on one hero, Ethereal on the other, and you're only 2 drops. Make them go first, make those charges, and get that turn 2 double to welcome them to Pound Town. Hey, thanks for watching. I know this took a while, but I just wanted to make sure I had enough time to really test this stuff out. Go to an event, and wait for the FAQ, because oftentimes that changes things. As always, special thanks to my patrons for keeping me alive, besides Christmas-flavored coffee. The Bearded One, Bjarni, Carl Martin Rosenberg, Carson Blake Phipps, Chaos Spawn, Charles Fadouk, Chris Hallett, Chungasaurus, Daniel Oroz, Das Oxalotl, Des Brennan, Doom and Darkness, Dr. Hank, Dwight Crow, Edward Lawrence, Eric, Erda Wanderer, Graham Seabrook, Greg Dykus, and the Sigmar and Son podcast, Heavy D6, Henners, Jacob Graham, Jens Nielsen, Jimmy Starr, Justin Hawkins, Kevin Harcum, Kyles Merchick, Marcus, Martin Orlando, Good Painter Stormcast Man, Matthew Davies, Michael Derazinski, Miguel Cabezas, Marie Gank, Nosh, Peter Atkinson, aka Plastic Crack, Perna, Richard Rossman, Rob Nelson, Steve Pegg, Tyler Emerson, Vincent Wright, Warbound, and Windigo. Keep putting up Shadowword paint on those rogues. Next episode we're going to catch up on some Q&A, a bunch of Mawtribes lists of the week, Holy Havoc Tournament Report, I'll try to get Steve Herner on here to talk about it, and I might do some painting Twitch streams so we can chat about some stuff. I gotta paint up some ogres. Anyway, thanks for watching.